Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome everyone to today's explainer. Medical coding for angiography can honestly feel like a giant convoluted maze, right? Especially when we're trying to navigate those super intricate anatomical pathways of the head, neck, and chest. But hey, that's exactly why we're here today. We are going to break this whole thing down. Our main goal for this explainer is to completely demystify these complex CPT guidelines. We're going to master these rules together so you can ensure your medical billing is absolutely accurate and fully compliant. Let's get to it.
We've got a pretty straightforward roadmap for today. First, we'll hit the aortic arch foundation, then move into coding separate aorta studies, selectively look at the head and neck, navigate those tricky intracranial carotid imaging rules, and finally, wrap the whole shebang up with external carotid add-on codes.
Starting right at the base, let's look at the aortic arch foundation. These are essentially your baseline rules for non-selective imaging.
So our absolute rock-solid baseline rule revolves entirely around code 36221. The guideline here is actually pretty straightforward. It tells us that if you're doing imaging of the carotid and vertebral arteries, and those originate from a non-selective aortic injection or catheterization, well, that entire process is bundled right into this single code. You can think of 36221 as your foundational starting block for literally all non-selective studies in this anatomic neighborhood.
Now, what's really fascinating here, and I know you guys run into this all the time, is how the coding rules actually account for real-world human biology. Anatomy isn't always perfectly textbook, right? Patients frequently show up with variations. Maybe it's a bovine arch, or a common left common and right innominate origin. Sometimes you see a left vertebral origin coming directly off the arch, or an aberrant right subclavian origin. But here's the absolutely vital takeaway. These anatomic variants do not, I repeat, do not change your code assignment. You stick right there with 36221.
All right, moving right along to our second area, coding separate aorta studies. This is where we figure out exactly when we can actually bill beyond that baseline.
Let's compare that baseline to the actual anatomy. Like we said, code 36221 is your arch baseline, but, and this is a big but, it does not replace true imaging of the aorta itself. So if the physician is actually performing true imaging of the thoracic aorta, which as you know uses CPT 75600 or 75605, or if they're looking at the abdominal aorta using codes 75625 or 75630, those procedures are entirely distinct from your baseline arch injection. You absolutely have to clearly distinguish between a foundational arch injection and a true dedicated aorta study. So you're probably asking, when can you actually charge and code for both the arch and these specific thoracic or abdominal areas? Well, there are absolute strictly enforced requirements for this. First off, the additional studies have to be requested separately. Second, they literally must be separate and complete diagnostic studies on their own. And third, and guys, this is a tremendously strong recommendation for your daily workflow, there must be separate paragraphs contained in the final narrative report to clearly support and substantiate each distinct study.
So, the crucial point we need to emphasize here is a major exclusion rule. Let's say multiple anatomic areas are being studied, right? But they all originate from a single vascular access point. In that very specific scenario, you do not additionally assign code 36200 along with your 36221. Trust me, that is a massive compliance pitfall, so definitely keep that one firmly in your back pocket.
Okay, let's keep working our way up. Section 3 is all about the selective head and neck. We're zooming in on codes 36222 through 36226.
Now, once we enter this territory of selective head and neck codes, the rules of bundling come into full, heavy effect. By definition, these selective codes, again, that's 36222 through 36226, inherently include imaging of the arch if it's performed. Think of it like a Russian nesting doll. That foundational arch procedure is basically just swallowed up and bundled right into the more complex selective code.
Because that arch imaging is already bundled in, this next rule is basically an absolute law. When you're using those selective codes 36222 through 3626, you absolutely do not also code 3621. You just drop that foundational non-selective code entirely. If you bill both, well, you're double billing for the arch, and that is a direct violation of the core guidelines. We definitely don't want to do that. By the way, if you're finding this breakdown helpful, please do me a huge favor, like this explainer and subscribe to my YouTube channel for daily updates. I'm always putting out content just like this to keep you ahead of the curve.
Moving on up, let's get into intracranial carotid imaging rules, specifically navigating codes 36223 and 36224.
Are you guys noticing a pattern developing here? Basically, the higher up the vascular tree we climb, the more anatomy gets bundled underneath it. These selective intracranial carotid imaging codes 36223 and 36224 bundle a massive amount of extracranial anatomy. If performed, these codes inherently include imaging of the common carotid, the proximal internal carotid, and the non-selective external carotid. I mean, that is a highly extensive amount of anatomical bundling happening under just 2 little codes.
Let's transition and see how this builds on those exclusion rules we just talked about. Since 36-2023 and 36-2024 already bundle all of those extracranial carotids we just listed, standard logic applies. When reporting these selective intracranial codes, you do not also code 36-2022. The lesser selective code is completely 100% enveloped by the more comprehensive intracranial codes.
All right, last but certainly not least, Section 5 focuses on external carotid add-on codes, and specifically, we're mastering code 36227. Now, add-on codes come with some incredibly strict prerequisites before you can even think about using them. Let's walk through the steps. Step 1. You can only assign 36227 if the external carotid artery or any of its branches are explicitly selected. Step 2, it must only be assigned in conjunction with our primary codes, which are 36222, 3623, or 3624. And Step 3, and please pay close attention to this strict frequency limit, you can report this a maximum of once per side. That's it, once per side.
So, you might be wondering, why is it only reported a maximum of once per side? Well, it's because code 36227 is incredibly broad and inclusive. It single-handedly covers any and all additional selective studies of those ipsilateral external carotid artery branches. It literally doesn't matter how many individual vessels are catheterized and studied in each external carotid territory on that side. 2 vessels, 5 vessels, doesn't matter. It's all just wrapped up into that single add-on code for that side of the body.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when standard pathways just aren't followed during a procedure. Consider this scenario based on a super important exception from the November 2013 AMA CPT Assistant. The standard path, like we just said, is assigning 36227 with 36222, 36223, or 36224. But what if a direct selective catheterization of the external carotid artery is performed without initial selective imaging of the common or internal carotid? In that highly specific exception, you actually break away from the add-on entirely. Instead, you have to assign the unlisted procedure code UPC 37799 for the selective external carotid artery injection and imaging. A real game changer there, right?
As we wrap up this pretty dense material, I want to leave you with one final absolute fundamental truth. Accurate documentation equals accurate coding. The guidelines we just walked through together demand absolute precision in the narrative reports to justify what you're billing. Make sure to like this explainer and subscribe to my YouTube channel for daily updates if you haven't already. I seriously love making these complex coding rules as clear and easy to understand as possible for you guys. So, knowing what you know now about all this vascular bundling and these tricky add-on exceptions, how are these rigorous guidelines going to change the way you review a final narrative report tomorrow morning? Think about it, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.